Tyler Dickerhoof Show, me with producer Alex. Today, before we get going, man, we got some spicy stuff to talk about. But before we get there, I'm going to tell you about the Impact Driven Leader Summit. It is May 7th and 8th in Spokane, Washington. We have some amazing guests, Jenny Catrone, Katie Harnato, Robbie Emery. They come from around the nation, but most importantly, they're going to be at the event, and we're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about culture. We're going to talk about navigating through startups to championship level organizations to creating a culture that you really want to be a part of. That's what we'll discuss at the Impact Driven Leader Summit. It will be a phenomenal 2 days, May 7th and 8th in Spokane, Washington. Go to the website, IDL Summit, to learn more about it. With that, to today's Newswire.
I will be there. 6.1 million Americans are behind on their mortgages.
Austin Powers, the million. All right, so state that again. 6.1 million Americans. This came out over the weekend. That FHA delinquencies just hit 11.3%. This is the highest in years. Here's the thing that I kind of want to start with. You've brought this up several times, and us discussing this over the last 10 days, really. We probably had more than enough information to queue it up. Last week, decided to go a different direction. We talked about club sports, which thank you so much for everyone that has commented. It's been some great lively discussions and definitely hit a hot point. I'll follow up on a follow-up on that in a moment. But talking about this economic crisis that we are really starting to. So let's go to the tip of the iceberg, right? The tip of the iceberg that, if everyone is watching, you're looking around, it's like, well, the economy sucks because of the tariffs. So let's talk about that one first, that the reality is everything that we're seeing now show up, whether it's delinquencies, whether it's, credit card debt, whether it is, all of those things. Student loan has been going on much longer than the last couple weeks. So, even I would say, there's, I read a little bit yesterday, saw a bits and pieces. I was kind of out of cell phone coverage. I was in the Olympic rainforest over the weekend. There is no cell phone coverage there. It is pretty spotty, to say the least. Anyways, that we're just now getting a run on some products because of the tariffs. There was a comment about people are flocking to car dealerships to buy cars before the tariffs go into place, which is only more laughable to me. If you're running out to buy a car because you're afraid of the tariffs, that's probably going to drive up prices rather than keep them lower. But that was standing. But those are some of the immediate responses. But when we start looking back at some of the information you and I have shared back and forth, Alex, we've talked about this default rate. So let's just kind of decipher that a little bit. 11.3% of FHA mortgages are currently in default, meaning that they haven't paid. I think the default is 60 days. Is that what it is? Or is it 90? Okay. So it's unpaid mortgages, 11.3%. And my guess is that's, a number of different factors, whether it's from layoffs, whether it's from just overall expenses. People, there's more month than there is, paychecks, and there's more month than there is income. So that 90 days. Okay. And so
90 days.
So 90 that days. Means it
foreclosure is 100
mortgages that have not been paid as we are recording this on March 31st since the first of the year. So that's not new. That was before Trump took office. That was before any of these things happened. These are notes that were at the end of last year, like, we're done. We're cooked.
I mean, and we've discussed this before. There was just all these, tea leaves that you can read the tea leaves.
Well, what's another one that you've brought up that, as you continue to look through things, you're like, man, this is so obvious.
Well, housing. I mean, I think there's a big, and people have been talking about it on Twitter and YouTube, but you just don't see it as much in mainstream media at all. And I think that's where as people consume less and less on mainstream media and more on YouTube and Twitter and those platforms, it's like how many people are aware of this housing crisis? I see it here in Florida.
So let's talk about the housing crisis in your perspective, living in Florida. What do you see going on around you in your neighborhoods where you travel within in Florida? What do you see as the housing crisis there?
Yeah, and we've spoken about this. It feels like a regional, like depending on where you live. But I'm in northern Florida, northeastern Florida, area called Palm Coast, just south of St. Augustine, north of Daytona Beach. Tons of building. They're building everywhere, and they're building all around Florida. But you just don't see them building anything that's going to also supply a ton of jobs. So, and the building seems to. I've lived here about a little over a year now. And some of the things that they were building before I moved, as I came to visit, are still being built, or it just seems extraordinarily slow. And I get curious because the stuff that did finish, there doesn't seem to be many people moving into those houses. And so I think Florida is going to be hit with some sort of housing correction.
Well, let's go into that a little bit, because one of the things we've talked about, you brought up Florida. Building a lot of houses. We talked about Texas. There's been quite a bit of building there. There's been documentation. I've seen this across different media outlets where it shows the number of, open, not vacant, but for sale homes. And when you look around the country, there is a mass difference in the number of available homes from the East Coast compared to the Mid-South, that would be Texas, to the West Coast where I live. And so we bring this up that there's a housing crisis, but it's very regional. One of the things that I see here in this Washington, Spokane, Northwest area is the housing crisis is more of what people have gone into is not build new single family homes. We're seeing a lot more multi-family homes being built. And even those, you're like, they can't build them fast enough for the demand, because quite honestly, many people do not have the income to be able to buy a new home. Because one of the biggest differences, I saw this, I was looking this morning, randomly looking, it is what it is. A 3-bed, 2-bath house. It was about 1,800 square feet. It was for sale in Ohio, right where I grew up. $180,000. Very old home. It's probably, 70, 80-year-old home. Okay. You could not touch that same size home in Spokane, Washington for under $400,000. Couldn't even get in the door. Wouldn't even, there is no, it doesn't matter if it is, 100 years old or 2 years old. If it is a 3-bed, 2-bath, 1,500 square feet, it's going to be over $400K.
Yeah. And everything they're building here where I'm located, it's like starting from the 300s, 300s to 400s. Which, and this is going back to another data point. If you
might
look at the
think I kind of am my podcast host where I set you up for that, Alex. So go ahead. One of the things that, we see that discrepancy between cost of homes in Florida, I mentioned Ohio, here in Washington, and one of the big factors, as you brought up, as you pointed out, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, is this middle class income, right? And how drastically it is fluctuated in terms of how much some of these states, like a state like Florida, right? So I have a chart here: middle class income in every U.S. state as of 2025. And in Florida, which I'm in, is ranked, I think, somewhere in the middle. Yeah, right around 30. Is between 49,000 on the lower end and 147,000
on the upper end. And I am in Washington,
so this is,
and it ranges from 63 to 189. So that is the lower bound, upper bound of median income. Right. Let me give just everyone listening, you're not able to see this chart, maybe we'll be able to get it into the video or a clip here, is Massachusetts is the number one state, 67,000 for lower, 200,000 for upper. At the same point, Mississippi is the lowest in the U.S. with 36,000 on the low end, 108. So even the range of middle income in the United States ranges from 36,000 to 200,000, depending on where you live. It's a pretty big gap. And even, if you look at some of these numbers, the the states Mississippi, West Virginia, Louisiana, Arkansas, Kentucky towards the bottom end. It's that 35 to 100,000, which I think if you go ask me, most people, if they don't have this chart data, if they haven't necessarily been looking at it, it's like, hey, what's middle income in the US? Like if you make over X amount, you're considering making good money. And I would still think, depending on the generation and depending on what their personal income, they would say if you're making over 100 grand, you're doing well. Mm-hmm. Well, what we showed is that in every single state, 100 grand is in the middle, the lower middle, or the upper end of middle income. That's it.
And so then the other data statistic that I wanted to mention is the gap between actual median household income and qualified income and affordability of a home. It's so there's a chart Creative Planning has put out on Twitter. They're like a financial institution, and so this is it's a 57% affordability gap income needed to buy a
number for people that like numbers.
A home.
The number that they indicate is 124,000 is the necessary income to be able to afford a median priced home in the U.S., which we just stated varies dramatically. That same 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot house is a range, in my opinion, probably from 180,000 for a nice home. I'm not talking about like a major fixer upper, right? 180,000 to 400,000, depending where you live. And again, this takes into consideration some of those states. So even at that gap's even bigger, because maybe in Ohio, that number's a little bit closer, but here in Washington, that gap is probably closer to 100%.
Oh yeah, and put I just left California, Orange County, California, which is crazy expensive, and homes like that you mentioned and that we live in here, if we they would be millions of dollars. I don't quite, it doesn't quite correlate. I'm like how are people able to, unless they're selling a home that they've sat in for a long time, made a ton of money, sold it, and then bought another home, right, that they can afford it, because the average middle class American just can't afford this. The affordability gap is so high; it's the highest it's ever been, to afford these homes in places like California and Washington and New Jersey. It just doesn't. And then the other part about this that's connected is jobs market, right? You see correction over correction since the last president was in office, President Biden, of all these corrections that it made with the jobs market, which seems to be much weaker than was told to us. And I think, and on top of that, no one's really buying it. We're kind of in this time where there's a lot of uncertainty. No one wants to sell. No one wants to buy. If the sellers, there's not enough buyers because they can't really afford it. They don't want to go into what is now all these defaults. I have a good friend who bought a home, over the past 3 years in New Jersey. He's struggling. I mean, he's just trying to make all these payments. And I think
that's the point that,
after month.
Really
I'll put him right in that.
Over time is when it plays out, because let's be honest, there's still a lot of people today. In my guess, if we look at the defaults, and this is, it's too difficult to speculate, but there's a lot of people that refinanced, bought homes during the, I would say, COVID period. I'm going to say between 2021 and prior, that have very low interest rates. Very, traditionally like bottom barrel, like less than 3%, 3% and less interest rates. Barrel. And so when you look at that, all of a sudden now you go from a house 3% to 6.5%, the interest coverage just more than doubled. So you can see a mortgage payment nearly double.
Yeah.
In to buy the same house. And I think what's going on is we're seeing that even the people that have really low interest rates and maybe are getting through that, now all of a sudden the rest of life, whether it's the credit card debt, everything else is catching up. Or, you have people that are like, hey, we're in a situation, we have to buy a house. This will get better. We're just going to string this along until we can't. And I think the point is where we can't. We have mortgage loans defaulting. We have the highest peak level of credit card defaults from small lenders. This even surpasses the recession of 08 and the dot-com bust of 0102. And so here's the thing that I don't ever want to be the case is Chicken Little sky is falling. Nah, it isn't. And even to your point, as we've talked about, it's like, man, this is so easy to recognize. Why can't people see it? Well, I'm going to say two things. And we've noted these levels, and they can be a good and a bad. We have the highest middle income ever in the United States. We have more people making over 6 figures a year now than ever. That's got to be great, right? Because that has been the quote unquote American dream for a generation is earn more than 6 figures, get to, multiple 6 figures. Oh my goodness. That's an amazing income. Okay. So we have that one. Hold on to that. The next thing is we have the highest stock market ever. It's clipping around, over 40,000 on the Dow.
Yeah, it's still pretty high.
It is higher than ever. There's more money flowing than ever. And yet, when we look at it, it's also, as we've talked about in regards to homes, as we've talked about median income, our dollar gets, it's worth less than it's ever been. Well, and I think that's where it's kind of like you can get fixated on the numbers and miss out on the reality. And I would say this happened during 08. It's happened to a lot of us during 08, myself included. It's like, man, I am starting to clip along. I'm making good money. I was making multiple, 5 figures a month. I was making a couple, multiple 6 figures a year in my nutrition business. Like, all right, I'm marching along. And I didn't have the understanding of the industry to know that, oh, shoot, this could all be gone like that. And it was, whether it was volatility, whether it's corrections, whether it was, and it's very much, there's a proverb that, states against this, don't look for get rich quick schemes. And the more that, unfortunately, like gambling sometimes is get rich quick schemes work until they don't work. And, I'm not saying any of this is levied in get rich quick, but we have leadership that is, I read this morning, and I think it's pertinent to bring up. And I saw this as I was logging into the platform that we use, Riverside, and it was an article from the Miami Herald. Miami Herald. It's the same letters as Howard, right? Well, almost. And it says voter outrage in California sparks political shift. And it was interesting because one of the things that they pointed to is that there was a survey by David Wolfson and Madison McQueen found that 83% of voters are dissatisfied with energy cost. 71% feel living expenses are poorly managed. Additionally, 73% want more anti-crime funding, and 72% see homelessness as an ongoing crisis. All right. I bring that interjection because I don't think California is different than the rest of the country. Except California has now realized, oh, this is what's really going on. You moved away from California. Well, you moved away from California
half the
a
city's
year ago.
Burned down still.
I moved away from California 15 years ago. I stopped doing, business trips to California 12 years ago. And none of that from the outside and having lived there, none of that surprises me. It's been that way in and part of some point of the last 10 to 15 years. And so when it's now people are finally understanding it, I think this is what's happened is they've got to the end of their rope and they're like, oh, we thought it would be different. We thought it would get better. And now it's not. And they're like, well, you guys promised political leaders. It doesn't matter which party. They're only in the same boat, in my opinion. You've promised it would be better and it's not. So now we're saying, we're not standing for this.
Yeah. And like, I like California
What
as a
part do you
state.
like?
It's a beautiful state. I mean, you got mountains and beaches. I loved Orange County. There were some
There are.
beautiful towns in Orange County. But the way the state is run over the last 15 to 20 years has just caused, in my opinion, just so much pain for a lot of people that you're forced to move out. I'd love to if I could have stayed and it was affordable and all these things were happening that I could agree with, I'd stay. But because of all those factors and the way it isn't, the way it's been poorly ran from leadership,
Well,
and
but I think
family decisions we
this
made,
goes into
it's tough.
the big crux of all of this is people are willing to pay for a lot. They're willing to put up with a lot of extra fees, difficulty, challenges until they no longer can. And then when they no longer can, they're forced to make decisions. For example, when we moved out of California and when we moved here to Washington, man, we got a pay raise. Cost of living was similar to a little bit less here in Washington. There were a few things that were cost less. Gas was less at that point. Vehicle registrations, no state tax. It's like, all right, this is affordable. And the quality of life is like, man, this is like much like what I experienced in Ohio. Better, but much like that. And now 15 years later, we're right back in the same boat that we were in California as far as being one of the most expensive states in the country to live in. We have a political regime which has continued to say, well, we just need to tax more and tax more and tax more and get us out of it. It's like, how about we spend less, which California is saying is, how about we waste less money on the things that aren't important and put money in the important parts? You're collecting enough, like put it into places. And then I think by virtue of getting back to what we've started this conversation is where we're at financially. And I think here are three things that I want to share today that people are going to be forced to have to deal with. The first one is, can you afford to live where you live?
Yeah.
Can you afford to live where you live? And that may, if it's a family, and know that, hey, I have family that lives in California. I have family that lives here in Washington. I have family that lives in Ohio. And quite honestly, we're very much at the place, my wife and I are looking and saying, all right, where can we have the quality of life that we want to have with the options we want to have? And where can we live and evaluate that? And that comes back to this regional model of, people are going to be forced to, instead of like you, very much like you, we want to stay in Orange County. Well, it's like, is that going to provide the quality of life for you, your wife, and your kids? Or, man, could we go somewhere else that maybe doesn't have all the things that California has, but man, we actually have some pretty nice things, but with the cost of living, the type of living difference, it actually gives us more opportunities to travel more, to take more experiences. That's going to be, and not everyone has that mobility. A lot of people do today, but that's going to be a major consideration.
Yeah, it's and I have a friend who went from Washington to Texas, big family, 6 kids, and kind of Tyler, found the same things. The wife had lived there many years. She grew up there and just saw it changing over the last 30 years. And they moved their whole family to Texas, but now the problem is, I guess, in places like Texas and Florida as well, they've built so much so quickly, but now they're seeing this housing correction or crash in certain regions in these areas because I feel like they've overbuilt, but they also haven't done it, in my opinion, like at least from what I see.
Well, and as I've seen that in the past when I was in California, that always comes later. People. Rarely are there situations where it's like, there are a few places like right now, Columbus, Ohio is one of the fastest growing regions of the country. Why? Because Intel is building a facility there. There's companies that are building and people are moving for those jobs. If we discussed earlier, moving to Texas, moving to Florida, we're moving because we want to live there and we'll figure out work.
Right.
And I think, what we've seen with that happen is
Yeah.
lack of services, lack of, resources for kids. You actually start overwhelming schools. You don't have enough athletic facilities.
Correct.
You don't have enough service stuff, which then, it takes a period of balance out before that stuff gets rebuilt, because you have to have the revenue, tax revenue, whatever else, to be able to build those things. I would say we're going to see a little bit of rebalancing where, from what I've gathered from you, Texas and Florida, it may look a little rocky the next 4, 5, 6 years until those start to come in line. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's long-term, right? It's like, are you willing to, like, for me, we're probably going to move on and go live near my parents in New Jersey, just because we want to be near family. For my friend in Texas, so it's a short-term play here, right? We don't want to, and my wife and I have talked about this. We feel like this town will have a boom era. It's going to explode at some point.
Yeah.
But are we willing to
Because there's a cost to that
for the next 10, 15 years? And we're like, yeah, there is. And then my friend in Texas is like, no, we're sticking around for Texas, with their area he's in. And that's cool. And I think that's those decisions you have to make.
I think
the
interesting part is, when, for example, when
Kelly
and I moved to Washington, and this was 15 years ago, we said, hey, unless something drastically changes, we're going to be there until our kids graduate. We're just going to ride it through. Well, we got 3 school years, essentially, just over 3 school years until that's over. So that's where we're very much looking at what's next. Wow. The next thing that I want to bring up as, things that people are going to have to wrestle with, and my encouragement to you is be very open. We are in a massive career correction. And it's difficult for a lot of people.
I love it.
It's painful for a lot of people. And as I talk about it, as I talk to, people like my parents, and we're like, we're going through this. And all of a sudden, my siblings, some of them might have to think about this. And it's like, I went to school to do X, Y, and Z. And now I find myself 10, 12, 15 years later, that industry is seemingly at this point a dead end. I need to pivot and go do something completely different. I did it. I'm doing completely different than what I did 24 years ago when I graduated college. And I'm grateful for it. It's cool. I'm okay with it. And we have a lot of people that have maybe been in tech services that now we're finding those are dead end jobs. And I hate to tell you, if you don't realize it, it's a dead end job. Unless you're the top 1% of programmers, you need to go find a different career. Go find a service career. Go find a sales career. Go be in some type of physical service, whether that is, construction, any of those things. Because the amazing thing that's happening, and this is not meant to get political, but one thing that we've seen is a major contribution to this country, and we need to build more manufacturing. We need to bring stateside some of the products that we buy internationally. And there's been a pretty significant investment in energy, manufacturing, all those things. Well, those jobs are going to need people. Even if it's going to need repair people for technology, AI, it's also going to need construction people. That is the great boom. If we look back to, one of the things that changed the United States was the Industrial Revolution. And it took so many people off farms, or maybe they were horse tenders or, carriage house operators. And it took them from that job and it put them in a factory. And I believe we're going to see much the exact same thing. And the sooner you get into that, the sooner you can be a pivot and pioneer, the better off you're going to be, as opposed to dragging your feet thinking, well, I don't have to do that.
Yeah. The other part of that too is I have a friend who's been out of a job for almost a year and a half. He's in that like executive leadership kind of role area, right? The ones that are making just into the multi 6 figures, right? And in New York City, and it's real. We talk all the time. It has just been super tough to find high level leadership roles in organizations, as well. Well, right? How do they pivot from going, hey, I'm 40, in my 40s. I got kids in middle school now. I can't find that role anymore. That those roles are either gone or they're locked
there
in.
Is there's a lot of, I would say, medium-sized organizations. When I look at some of my clients in, not large corporate operations, but, smaller operations that are people that are in their mid-30s that are maybe working in tech, that may be working in some of these other industries, they need a lot of assistance. And so I've seen people, depending on their different skill set, become fractional. Fractional, I'm going to be a CMO and I'm going to fractionally work with a couple different people because that's what I can do to serve them, because they don't have enough to hire me, but they're looking for someone that is a little bit older, a little bit wiser, has a little bit more experience to be able to tell them what they don't know. There's a big place for that today. We've seen virtual jobs, whether it's people that run virtual companies for virtual assistants, bookkeepers, all those things. That's a massively growing industry because we have a lot of, and this is what's going into the point number 3, people that start or operate, quote unquote, additional income streams. And, all of a sudden, for example, Kelly and I, we started into network marketing. That was 14 years ago. It provided a massive income stream, which has allowed us to do other things that is still a big part of our life. But if you are willing to look and say, hey, where can I go to learn and, apply this, you're going to find great opportunities. So I would say for someone like that, it's, humble yourself and say, I'm willing to go do whatever. And start to connect with people and say, hey, this is the expertise I have. This is what I have. Instead of trying to land the sweet cush corporate job with the, the hours and the expense count, whatever. It's like, no, you're going to have to go build it. You're going to have to go do the rough, tumble, hard stuff, but you're going to be rewarded for it because you're going to learn and get better either way. And that experience might actually lead you into the next C-suite opportunity. And it's just being willing to look outside of what you've done every day and do something different, because that's what's going to provide the greatest opportunity for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Always.
Tyler, can I ask you a question? Because I'm looking at this. One of the posts that we shared is that 2008 financial crisis unfolded tweet.
Maybe.
Go ahead. Have that one up? So, you have all these different, times, and this is specifically looking at the stock market. This is right at the 2008 financial crash, which is you have all these defaults, you have credit card payment delinquencies, foreclosures starting to happen. The Fed, wanted to keep interest rates at 2% or target at 2%. And then you have this capitulation event, right? Which ends up being a massive opportunity, right? And I want you to speculate for us, maybe a little bit. I don't feel that this capitulation event has occurred yet. It happened in just before the spring of 2000, the spring of 2009. Actually, it occurred. Do you have any sort of speculation on when that type of capitulation will happen, and what could
here's a couple factors that I think is going to lead to that. And so just give people listening or maybe watching, but we haven't thrown this up on screen. If we look at the sequence events, this starts in January of 27, goes through all of 28, and then eventually the great collapse was in March of 2009. It's kind of what it was taking. Two things that I learned in one of my careers was trading commodity markets. And one of the things that I would say something I learned with that industry is seasonal is real. And, people like to take, especially stock market traders, they like to be able to go to the Hamptons in the summer. And when they like to go to the Hamptons in the summer, that means they close their book in April. They're happy with their profits. They kind of just skirt through. And I think whether it's the older generation, whether it's younger generation, whether it's kind of like, hey, I'm just going to be happy to ride this thing out, and you can qualify it however you want. This was a case in point when we talk about that capitulation happening between essentially the August of 08 into 09. Is it perfect? Nope, but okay. Number 2 part.
Yeah.
is when everyone goes to one side of the boat, they're going to get wet. So you're better off going to the other side. And I think when you brought up, it's like, man, this is so easy to see. Why aren't people seeing it? Because they're all on one side of the boat. Everything is great. And so it's the people that are brave enough to go to the other side that, are setting themselves up for protective measures. And can we, is there anyone that is perfect? No. But when I look at this, when, what preceded that capitulation, right, that downward slide was people in either their financial metrics or their P&Ls or whatever their financial, understanding was, that they thought everything is good. And there are businesses, there are major lenders that are like, hey, we can weather this storm. Whatever. And when we start getting more people, and it's probably going to happen through this year, that like, oh, geez, we can't weather this storm. We need to pull the plug. And so one of the things you've asked me at times, like, Tyler, do you think it's going to happen this summer? I'm like, no. It's starting, but it's going to take a little while for this to play out. And that's what I think it comes back to. Hey, look for ways to be mobile, and where can I go to reduce my cost of living? What can I do to make a career pivot? Instead of waiting till you get laid off and then decide, go be proactive. Because it's a lot better to be in that case, especially when it comes to a pivot. Why are you coming to pivot? Well, I realized that as a programmer for a mid-level, whatever, I'm going to get replaced by AI. So why don't I pivot and go do something that interests me? I'm willing to get started now and be on the ride up rather than the ride down. And then the last one is, if you're finding yourself in financial positions, hey, start to do the cutback. What can we get away with? How can we make these, kind of corrections, but be willing to, find additional ways to earn an income stream that could possibly lead to something bigger for you. Or, one of the things, and I've read a book recently about this, and it said, hey, don't spread yourself thin. Don't chase too many rabbits. Man, I believe that entirely. Don't do that. And that isn't what I'm saying. Is for me, when we got into network marketing, it's like, man, I already liked everything we were doing, like the nutritional products to serving people. It's like, I'd been doing this stuff for years, just not got paid for it. Like, dude, this is fun. In the virtue of, man, I learned more about leadership over that, especially that next 5-6 years, that I had no idea that I didn't know. And I think, coming back to the executive mention, it's like, hey, go work in an industry where you're going to learn more about leading people, serving people. That will come back and benefit you than you will ever imagine. And that doesn't mean going to, the closest Harvard or Columbia or Yale or whatever and do their online, something additional career courses. Like, no, go actually into sales, work with people, lead people. You will learn more than anything that's in a curriculum in a textbook in a university setting. No, not textbook. They don't do textbooks anymore, but I think you get what I'm alluding to.
No, well, I guess for me, when I look at all of this data, the credit cards, the student loans, the housing market, like, what are banks? How are banks? Because that was like the capitulation event for me was like when the banks started to foreclose.
What happens there is when you see
bankrupt,
great volatility. I've asked some of my real estate friends, and, all right, what's going on in the real estate around the country? And they're like, well, things are sitting on the market a little bit longer. Sellers are still pretty proud. They don't want to lower the prices. And when we start seeing a coupling of falling prices and just, people that are behind on mortgages, so mortgage defaults,
defaults.
That's when you need to get worried. But when it happens,
well, that's what's happening right now.
Right now, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. We're just starting to talk about it. We're not seeing where people are lining up at the courthouse to buy distressed homes. When all of a sudden you go to a neighborhood in Florida, and all of a sudden There's no one selling any of these, bank owned, and they're liquidating them. That's when all of a sudden things are in trouble, because that is when the bank, this is what's happening in some of these defaults, especially 90 days, is the bank is like, all right, how do we work through this? What can we do to get some money? How do we just keep you along? And when all of a sudden that doesn't work and they have to take over, and so we have bank-owned assets, okay, that's where trouble is. That's where we're really in trouble. Right now is just kind of like the flicker of the smoke, the start of the fire. And it's going to happen. And I think what we're seeing, and especially in different areas, is when we start to see those numbers slide, especially regional, that's a good opportunity to either relocate, look for different places, however, to say, oh, I'll buy a distressed asset. Now, as you and I talked about, there's a big difference between buying a distressed asset in the middle of nowhere, Florida and Texas, as opposed to I'm going to go buy a distressed asset in an area where there's maybe some services, sustainability. I can have a good quality of life. Dude, those are the opportunities in front of us.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, we're interesting times. It's just I love watching the mainstream media basically point everything to tariffs. It's all about tariffs.
But that's like
smoke and mirrors almost. It's like, wait, don't look over here. Don't look over here.
All these problems are happening because of that. And it's like, yeah, you may think so, but also when we look at, the tariffs, my opinion, and we've shared this a little bit before, is, man, I think it's very logical. What can we do to mitigate the long-term effect of some of these price, potential recessionary? Hey, drive more jobs, drive more world reliance on what we have here in the U.S. Dude, that's an easy way to kind of buffer it. Yeah, we're going to have industries that lose. Okay, that's happened every economic cycle that's ever existed in the U.S. There's going to be industries that just lose. And that also then will spur a brand new industry that no one even thought about. So, yeah.
100%. Yeah. In those times, it brings, you learn a lot, and it brings out some really unique opportunities in businesses.
All right. Well, as we wrap up, just a reminder, Impact Driven Leaders Summit, go to IDL Summit, May 7th and 8th. Would love to see you there. Come to Spokane, enjoy the time, learn and be around great people. Until next time, choose to lead with impact.